70% of people with PCOS have insulin resistance, and it's that insulin resistance that drives so many of the symptoms that people with PCOS experience. It's also that insulin resistance that increases people's risk of developing other chronic conditions. So by addressing the insulin resistance, we can ease a lot of PCOS-related symptoms and decrease the risk of developing those chronic conditions. Hi there, Kendra Tolbert here. I'm a registered dietitian and yoga teacher, and I specialize in women's health and fertility. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 simple steps that I often recommend to my one-on-one clients to improve their insulin resistance, which ultimately improves their PCOS symptoms and reduces their risk of developing chronic conditions down the road. This video, along with the previous video that I created, the PCOS and yoga video that I created, are sponsored by Theralogix. I'll be telling you more about Theralogix, one of my favorite supplement brands, later in this video. So let's dive right into our first tip. Tip number 1, pair your carb-rich foods with fiber, fat, and protein-rich foods, rather than going low carb or no carb. I am not a proponent of restrictive eating. It's not sustainable, and it can actually be detrimental. So rather than going low carb or no carb, simply pair your carbs with protein, fat, and fiber. This is going to help your body more slowly break down and absorb those carbohydrates. One of my favorite tools to use in order to create balanced meals is the plate method. So with the plate method, you aim to have about a half of your plate made up of non-starchy vegetables. The quarter of your plate, or a quarter of your plate, is made up of protein-rich foods, and the other quarter of your plate, that's for your carb-rich foods. By having this ratio of non-starchy vegetables, protein, and carbohydrates, you have a balanced meal. Of course, we don't always eat our foods in these separate compartments. So if you're making a stew or a curry or a pasta dish or a soup or a sandwich or a burrito or a taco or anything like that, you're still thinking play with similar ratios, right? That's still the goal, to have about a half of the meal made up of vegetables, about a quarter of the meal made up of protein-rich foods, and about a quarter of the plate made up of carb-rich foods. And of course, you're also using fat to cook your meal, and some of the components of the meal may have naturally occurring fat. Maybe you're adding a sauce or a dressing, and you're also using herbs and spices to really round out and balance your meals. Tip number 2, get moving, especially after meals. Movement after meals helps our body to make use of the sugar that's now available in our blood after those meals without needing as much insulin for that sugar to enter the cells where it can fuel the different functions of the cell. So I'm consistently and constantly recommending that my clients go for a 10-minute walk outside after meals, if that's available to them. I like the additional benefits of getting out in nature, but that's not always available, and it's not always something that they even want to do. So instead, they might go for a walk on the treadmill, there we go. Or they might go for a quick ride on a stationary bike. They might use an elliptical. They might have a little dance break. They might just go for a walk through their building. They might climb the stairs. There's so many different ways to get moving after meals. There's really no wrong way to do it. The important thing is to move. Tip number 3, consider supplementing with inositol. Inositol is a naturally occurring sugar alcohol that we find in a number of foods, including grains and beans and nuts and fruit, but we can also get it from supplements. And I have pretty much since day 1 of working with people with PCOS, so for the last almost decade, about 8 years, I have been recommending that people with PCOS who have insulin resistance consider supplementing with inositol. And my favorite brand of inositol is Theralogix. I've actually done at least 2 other videos all about inositol, and more specifically Theralogix Ovasitol. And I'll make sure to link to them in the description box below so that you can watch them to learn even more about the benefits of inositol and exactly how inositol works. There's even a blog post that goes really into how insulin resistance works and how it is that it drives certain symptoms with PCOS. So if you really are into that sort of thing, make sure to head to the description box below to learn more about that. But suffice to say, I'm a fan of Inositol and definitely a fan of Theralogix Ovasitol.
Theralogix is a brand I have trusted and recommended for years. The very first product of theirs that I was introduced to was actually Ovasitol, which is their inositol supplement. Ovasitol contains a mixture of myo and dechiro-inositol, and it is my go-to supplement for supporting regular cycles, insulin and blood sugar balance, and healthy androgen levels in people with PCOS. To learn more about Ovasitol, click the link in the description box below. If you decide to order Ovasitol or any of their other amazing supplements, like maybe their Theromega, which is their omega-3 supplement, or their NeoQ10, their CoQ10 supplement, or their Theranatal Ovavite, which is their preconception prenatal, which contains a blend of fertility-supporting vitamins, minerals, and CoQ10. Make sure to use my provider referral code 100368 for preferred pricing. Thank you again to Theralogix for sponsoring this video. Tip number 4, prioritize the habits that support good quality sleep in hopes of getting at least 7 hours of good quality sleep when possible.
I had to add the when possible because I think sometimes there's too much pressure to get a perfect night of sleep. And that pressure for perfection, which is unattainable, can actually be kind of anxiety and stress inducing, which I would say is counterproductive to sleeping well. So rather than aiming for a perfect night of sleep, aim to prioritize the things that support a good night of sleep. Some of the things that you can do to support good quality sleep include moving earlier in the day. So we already talked about ways that you can move throughout the day. That's also going to help with insulin resistance. And another thing that you can do is expose yourself to sunlight first thing when you wake up in the morning. If you can't do it first thing when you wake up, as soon as possible after waking. And the final thing that I often recommend is that people limit their exposure to artificial light later in the day. All of these things can support good quality sleep and help people get enough sleep, because we do know that inadequate sleep or sleep deprivation is associated with worsening in insulin resistance as well as the development of insulin resistance. And tip number 5, our final tip, manage your stress without becoming stressed about being stressed. You don't need to live a stress-free life, and stress is not the big bad boogeyman that sometimes people make it out to be. Yes, we don't want excessive psychological stress. We don't want unchecked, unmanaged, chronic stress. But the idea that you need to live a stress-free life in order to be well simply is not true, and it's impossible. Our bodies are resilient and we are able to adapt to so many different things. We really can handle everyday stresses if we're supporting ourselves. And there's lots of ways to support yourself. Some of my favorite ways to manage stress, to build up your resilience, and to be actually able to live in this world where stress is inevitable include things like journaling, getting enough sleep. We already talked about that. Getting in movement. Ooh, we talked about that too. Look, you already got your bases covered. And also practicing mind-body practices like Qigong and Tai Chi and yoga, which I just created a new PCOS yoga video, which I will link to down below. I hope that you have found some new ways that you can support yourself along with the recommendations of your healthcare provider so that you can address your insulin resistance, see some improvements in your PCOS symptoms, and reduce your risk of developing chronic conditions that are associated with PCOS. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you Theralogix for sponsoring this video and supporting this channel. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be well, and bye for now.